Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 30, the Preventing Violence Against Women by Illegal Aliens Act. Over the past 4 years, President Joe Biden and border czar Vice President Kamala Harris have allowed millions of unvetted illegal aliens into the United States. At the same time that they facilitated the collapse of our southwest border, President Biden and Vice President Harris abandoned any semblance of interior immigration enforcement. In a September 2021 memo, the Biden-Harris administration made enforcement more difficult for Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers. In training materials obtained by the Judiciary Committee and published in a staff report last year, DHS failed to answer seemingly clear-cut questions, such as whether an alien who served a 20-year drug-related prison sentence or an alien who discharged a firearm outside of a police station should be priorities for arrest and deportation. Until the Trump administration can change them, those are the training materials required for all of ICE's enforcement personnel nationwide. Instead of making clear that ICE officers should carry out their duties to remove criminal aliens from American streets, the Biden-Harris administration instructed ICE officers to develop a full profile of a criminal alien before deciding whether to arrest someone who is in the country illegally. In the training examples, that included determining whether an illegal alien has high blood pressure or is a caregiver. The Biden-Harris administration's immigration absurdity appears to know no bounds. In a transcribed interview with the Judiciary Committee, a former top ICE official admitted that the Biden-Harris administration's policies have made immigration enforcement more dangerous for ICE officers, more difficult to carry out, and less efficient overall. The ICE official even acknowledged that because of the border crisis, fewer ICE officers are available to track down public safety and national security threats because they're left to do border administration-related tasks. The consequences of these policies are not hypotheticals or simply numbers. They are a reality for families across the country, and they are emblematic of the Biden-Harris administration's war on women. Last September, the Judiciary Committee heard from 3 mothers whose daughters were brutally assaulted and murdered by illegal aliens welcomed into the country by President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. Tammy Nobles recounted how Joe Biden and Kamala Harris released into the country the MS-13 gang member who went on to murder and sexually assault her daughter, Kayla Hamilton. The killer later admitted to 4 additional murders and 2 additional rapes. Patty Marin told how an illegal alien raped and strangled her daughter, Rachel, and then stuffed her body into a drain pipe. The alleged murderer entered the country through border czar Kamala Harris's wide-open southwest border. Alexis Nungari spoke about how Joe Biden and Kamala Harris released at the border the 2 illegal aliens who went on to viciously assault and murder her 12-year-old daughter, Jocelyn. Ms. Nungari said she had no clothing from the waist down. Her hands and her ankles were tied, and she was thrown under the bridge of water like she was nothing but garbage. Victim advocate April Aguirre also told this tragic story of 11-year-old Maria Gonzalez. The Biden-Harris administration released her alleged murderer into the United States. Just 7 months later, the illegal alien assaulted and killed Maria, wrapped her body in a trash bag, stuffed her in a laundry basket that he shoved underneath his bed. These are not isolated incidents. In February 2024, an illegal alien was arrested in Alabama for allegedly raping a 14-year-old girl who could not consent to the intercourse as she was physically helpless or mentally incapacitated. In April 2024, an illegal alien was arrested in Indiana for allegedly breaking into a Michigan mobile home park and sexually assaulting 2 young girls. In May 2024, authorities arrested a 20-year-old illegal alien for allegedly snatching an 11-year-old girl off the street in front of her Lake Worth, Florida home and sexually assaulting her. According to local officials, the Guatemalan national crossed the U.S.-Mexico border in early January 2024, made his way to Florida shortly thereafter, and does not have an immigration court date until 2027. Just earlier this month, ICE arrested a Dominican national who had been charged with assault to rape, kidnapping, and indecent assault. The illegal alien crossed the border in January 2023 and was placed on alternatives to detention. That is Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's immigration legacy. More unvetted aliens released into American communities, more criminal aliens on American streets, and more Americans endangered by radical, reckless policies. Thankfully, the American people have voted to end this nightmare. The Preventing Violence Against Women by Illegal Aliens Act is just one of many bills Republicans have proposed that will help close immigration loopholes, reverse the disastrous policies of the Biden-Harris administration, and implement President Trump's immigration enforcement agenda. The Preventing Violence Against Women by Illegal Aliens Act makes crystal clear that illegal aliens who commit sex offenses are inadmissible to and removable from the United States. The bill also fixes a discrepancy in current law by creating a ground of inadmissibility for domestic violence to mirror the existing ground of removability for the same offenses. In addition, H.R. 30 expands the current ground of removability for domestic violence by cross-referencing an existing statutory definition for sex offenses. Although many aliens can already be found inadmissible to or removable from the United States for certain sex offenses and domestic violence offenses, this bill expands and clarifies the conduct for which an alien can be found removable from the country. The time is now to take seriously the danger of criminal aliens in the United States. Anything that makes it easier for adjudicators and officials to ensure a criminal alien's arrest and removal should receive overwhelming bipartisan support, particularly when it comes to sex offenses and domestic violence. I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 30, the Preventing Violence Against Women by Illegal Aliens Act, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Doing a great job representing my former constituents. So I'll recognize you for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's indeed big shoes to fill in Pasco County. Ms. Humpton, thank you very much for being here today and for providing your testimony. Your perspective on artificial intelligence empowering employees really resonates, I think, with many of us on this committee. There is a fear that AI will replace the American employee, but I agree with you that we need to look at AI as an assistant to the American manufacturer rather than its replacement. Can you provide some examples of how Siemens is using AI in manufacturing and supply chains to help its workers do their jobs more effectively and productively?
Thank you, Congresswoman Lee. Yeah, this is really fun because there are a couple of fantastic stories here. Imagine a couple of engineers thinking that they want to design a light motor to be used in aviation, electric aviation. What you have to do is take weight out of the motor. How are you going to do that? What these engineers did is they collaborated, they were debating back and forth, they were going to have votes on the team of who had the better design for one element. And one member of the team said, well, why don't we ask our generative design assistant? And it turned out that assistant drew a picture that was unlike what either of the expert engineers had come up with. And in fact, its performance was better than what could have been designed using paper and pencil. Now, let me tell you another funny story. We work with battery manufacturers all the time, and I met with one startup about 18 months ago, and the president of the company was telling me about his new US-based factory that he was getting ready to build. I asked him if he had used a digital twin to plan that facility, and he said, no, I've done something even better. I'm actually building a scale model. We're gonna have just one line, small scale production. I saw that same CEO several months later, and he said, Barb, I should have gone the digital route. When I built it, I forgot to put in any overflow areas. And so anytime one part of the line stopped, we had a mess on our hands. These are just examples of the kinds of things that come up where the use of AI can actually elevate the results that we get. And that's not to mention the things that are happening every day. We have operations that require intensive stocking and restocking, and frankly, that's drudgery. But the ability now to use artificial intelligence to help us plan that work, plan the movement of goods through our factories, we are making our own factories safer, more productive, and frankly, just plain more fun to work in.
Thank you, Ms. Kinder. I'm sorry, Ms. Humpton. Now, Mr. Kinder, I want to first congratulate you on the grant that Autodesk received from my alma mater, the University of Florida, to advance the field of industrialized construction engineering. As I understand it, this work will dramatically reduce construction costs while doubling the speed of construction, and I look forward to seeing what this partnership can accomplish. Could you tell us about how Autodesk software makes manufacturers more resilient and ready to adapt to supply chain disruptions, inflation, and other things?
Thank you for your question, Congresswoman Lee. We're incredibly excited about the project with the University of Florida. Industrialized construction is something that we have supported for a long time. It's basically bringing manufacturing practices and the efficiencies of that into the construction process, which does save time and money. And so when we talk about industrialized construction, we're talking about building some things off-site and then bringing them and assembling them on-site. We talk about taking software, including AI, and bringing manufacturing software, the HVAC system in a building, into the architectural software and combining those. Historically, those have been very disconnected. So all of this drives efficiency, and when you add AI on top of that and digital twins, it becomes a much more efficient process.
And in addition to the added efficiencies that you describe, how can the use of artificial intelligence in this way also foster innovation?
We have a capacity challenge in the U.S. in terms of a shortage of skilled labor and manufacturing jobs that are unfilled. AI, by taking some of the drudgery as described, or some of the more mundane or tedious, low-value added tasks, by automating those, you augment the worker. So you're augmenting the worker, freeing up some of their time so they can focus on much more creative and more productive tasks.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentlewoman. Now recognize Representative Trahan for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Go Gators, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being with us here today. I'd like to go back to you, Mr. Whitman, for some follow-up questions. In your testimony, you advocate for Congress to establish a uniform name, image, likeness, and revenue sharing framework in line with the House settlement. How do you see the dynamic between the collectives and schools changing if we are to codify the basic provisions of the settlement?
Thank you, Congresswoman. The question around the relationship between institutions and their respective collectives is one that I think is best left to those organizations. I think there's no question that in the new environment that will be created by the settlement, we expect those relationships to evolve. I would imagine they would go one of three different directions. In one instance, you could see some collectives wind down and cease operations. Secondly, you could see some collectives that come quote-unquote in-house to the athletic program and begin to operate internally under the umbrella of the athletics department. Or third, you could see some collectives continue to exist separate and apart from the athletic program, but repurpose their focus and begin to develop true market-based NIL opportunities for student athletes.
And I'd also like to discuss the application of antitrust laws to collegiate sports and the NCAA. In your testimony, you distinguish between a blanket exemption and a safe harbor. Why do you believe that a safe harbor is appropriate, and why is that important for collegiate sports?
It's important today to understand that we have leadership across college athletics that recognizes the need for college athletics to evolve and change, to modernize the structure that has existed for decades around college sports. The challenge that we face is that every time we try and implement new rules, new procedures, we get pulled into court under the auspices of the antitrust laws. And so we're not looking for Congress to quote unquote fix college sports. We're looking for Congress to create a legally defensible space where we can fix college sports. And right now, because of the overarching concerns around antitrust and the need for us to create a national environment, that lends itself naturally to some challenges in the antitrust space, and that's where we would appreciate some protection so that we could function more openly and create that national playing field that we think everybody wants in college athletics.
Mr. Egbo, I'd like to go back to you. As a student athlete, you bring a very important perspective to the conversation that we are having here today, and we are nearing the end of our hearing. So I wanted to come back to you and ask this question. Is there anything that you believe is an important perspective that you have not had the opportunity to share with us today or haven't been asked about yet today?
Yeah, I'd like to take the time to just reemphasize some of the things that I said in my opening statement. You know, student athletes, we value this experience greatly. Like, this collegiate experience is something that creates opportunities. Like I mentioned, my life has changed from my opportunity to play college sports, and it will continue to change because of those connections I have. So I want to reemphasize that student athletes, again, when talking about employment, like, we want to preserve those opportunities, and we believe that the opportunities that we do have come from being student athletes first. So a lot of what we are desiring and asking Congress to help with is to protect those opportunities, like I said, for student athletes like me that are in these situations and at institutions like myself. But just want to say thank you again for the opportunity to hear us, because we know that you guys care about these issues.
And Ms. Cole, the same question for you. Is there anything you are hoping to share with us today or want to emphasize for our benefit?
I really think I just would like to emphasize how grateful I am to have had a positive experience with the new NIL regulations, and I'm so grateful to all of y'all for taking the time to put effort in to continue to help athletes have a similar experience to as I had.
All right. Mr. Whitman, coming back to you, how are you anticipating, what are you doing now to prepare for challenges? If the settlement is approved and implemented, how will that affect the resources and the programs that you currently provide?
It will allow us to begin generating additional resources, we think, through a number of different avenues. It'll allow us to begin providing direct compensation to our student athletes in the form of NIL licenses, allow us to control that environment more, to provide greater accountability to our student athletes. Our student athletes trust us. They trust our athletics program. They understand that we're actively working in their best interests, and we look forward to, under the settlement, being able to lock arms with them and create a stronger partnership that ultimately enhances their opportunity to be a student athlete at our university.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Now we'll recognize Ms. Laurel Lee for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for convening this important hearing. And I also express my gratitude to each of our witnesses for being here today and sharing your important testimony with us. So during the last Congress, I had an opportunity to work on legislation related to protecting children, most notably the REPORT Act, and was fortunate to partner with a number of the groups that are represented here today in crafting that policy. And I look forward to continuing our work together on protecting kids online here in this committee. As our committee explores legislation such as COPPA, we face the task of ensuring that we are making the right decisions in keeping our children safe. Your input and your testimony, as you've heard today, is so valuable to us drafting legislation and getting it right. Ms. Morell, as you noted, I thank you for being here and for sharing your expertise and your thoughtful insight about these challenges. And as you noted, it has been many years since Congress enacted privacy protections for children online. And in those years, technology has evolved and outpaced the protections that we have currently in place. I am eager to work on COPPA with Representative Castor and Wahlberg to improve protections for minors in a way that is in keeping with the threats we face in the 21st century. Now, one thing I want to touch on specifically is the targeted ads. So as they relate to adults, those can sometimes be helpful in retail and other applications. They can sometimes be something that is a benefit to the consumer. But for targeted ads as they relate to children and young people, will you explain to us why that practice in particular is harmful?
Yes, it's extremely harmful because children don't have the maturity that an adult has to be able to make decisions for themselves and to discern truth from false claims. And so I think it's really dangerous that these businesses are allowed to target ads to children in ways that then they feel compelled then that they should buy this product, and they're not discerning. And so I think it's a really predatory practice.
And on that note, in your testimony, you identify how big tech continues to recruit younger and younger users to their platforms. And you were just speaking with Representative Fry about your view that we really ought to just restrict access to these platforms to a higher age. Tell us a little bit more about your thoughts on that subject.
Yes, so I think that the nature of social media today is not a safe place for children. I feel like example after example has shown that the environment created by the product design, the way that their algorithms work, the kinds of material it promotes, which is often the most sensational or violent or explicit material is what gets promoted into children's feed, have made it an extremely unsafe place, as well as the metrics are designed to incentivize children to even post sexual images of themselves. And it has normalized a lot of the practices that we're talking about. Why are teens creating deep fake pornography? Because the environment and nature of the online world is extremely sexualized and violent. And so it is not a safe place for children. And I've said this before, but the same way that in the real world, we don't take children to bars or strip clubs and then try to blindfold them there. We just don't take them to those places. And I think social media has gotten to that point today that unless the business model vastly changes, it is not a safe environment for children, nor is it a safe substance, because as we've seen, brain studies show it acts on the brain like highly addictive drugs. And so for both those reasons, I think the precedent in our laws tell us to age restrict it out of childhood.
And Ms. Hawkins, one of the things that you have emphasized is the vulnerability of young teens who are not protected after the age of 13 under our current scheme. Would you like to speak on this as well and how you think that should change?
Thank you. Well, one of the problems with COPPA originally passed is that it set the digital age, inadvertently set the digital age of adulthood at 13. And even though it was focused on privacy, big tech has just run away with this idea, and they've literally, one time I met with Google 10 years ago, I walked out of the meeting with Google, and we were talking about, filters for 13, 14, 15-year-olds, and they said, why would we want to block pornography from a 14-year-old? They're adults at that age. And that is when I realized the impact of creating this digital adulthood age. And I just ask, there's so much good in COPPA 2.0. There's so much good, and we need it. But I also ask that we not further cement this idea that we're digital adults at that age and that parents are not needed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Chair recognizes now the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for convening this important hearing. Thank you to our witnesses who have joined us today to provide testimony. This committee remains committed to restoring public trust in our federal law enforcement agencies, and a critical part of that involves holding open, informed conversations with experts like yourself to identify areas of proposed reform and change that we can then use to inform our work in collaboration with the intelligence community. Last Congress, I was proud to lead the RISA bill that we've been discussing here today, which made significant reforms to how our federal law enforcement agencies handle, collect, and retain critical intelligence. This legislation was an important first step in our broader effort to rebuild confidence in the intelligence community and to keep America secure. There is no question that the abuses that we have seen, particularly in the FBI's handling of Section 702 information, are deeply troubling, and the surveillance, unauthorized or unlawful, of American citizens must be stopped. It should not have happened, and it must not happen going forward, which is why accountability and transparency and the things that we are discussing here today are so important. But it is also important that any discussion that we have about 702 include a recognition of why we have it and why it exists, and that this is a vital part of our country's intelligence gathering capabilities. It is an essential component of what we do, and it is necessary that this conversation center on how we make it better, how we ensure accountability and transparency without dismantling it. With that in mind, I appreciate your efforts to help us strike that balance and identify where we can further improve and strengthen FISA overall and Section 702 in particular. Mr. Scher, I would like to start with you, and in particular, return to the discussion you were just having about the FISC and some of the reforms that we implemented in the FISC to ensure a greater level of accountability and a prevention of some of the abuses that we've seen in the past. In particular, as you know, the RISA bill implemented inclusion of a more adversarial process for FISC proceedings. You just mentioned you thought we could do more there with amici. I would love to hear more about your thoughts about how that program could be further enhanced.
My recollection of RISA is that, and I agree with you, Congresswoman Lee, that there were some very useful reforms in RISA, and we should look to build on those. Rather than tear them down. But I think one, with respect to amici in the FISA court, I think that one limitation is that currently amici are only appointed if the judge decides that an amicus would be helpful. And so that obviously leaves the FISC judge with lots of discretion as to whether to appoint an amicus. We would prefer to see that expanded somewhat so that there's a category of cases where the judges are expected to appoint amici. For example, cases that obviously involve sensitive political issues or religious issues, like the FBI's investigation of the traditionalist Catholics down in Richmond last year or a couple of years ago. Those kinds of situations, you can identify categories of situations where an amicus, at least presumptively, should be appointed. And if an amicus is not going to be appointed, then the judge should have to explain why not.
And I would note a couple of additional reforms we made specifically in the FISC that were targeted to prevent some of the past abuses we've seen. One, a requirement that exculpatory evidence be included in an application before the FISC. And second, also that opposition research could not be the basis for granting of a warrant by the FISC. Are there other things that you think, first off, do you find those reforms to be something that was productive and useful? And second, are there other things you think we should get at or address there with the FISC?
Absolutely, those were important reforms for sure. I think one additional thing that would be very useful is to provide, create a system whereby people whose rights are abused in the FISC court, for example, like the Kevin Kleinsmith situation, make clear in the law that people who are victims of that are entitled to compensation when that happens. That will not only be fair to those people, but also will provide an added deterrent to abuse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time has expired.
Thank the gentlelady. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Knott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having this hearing. To all of the members and the...
Now I recognize my fellow Florida Gator. Go Gators, Ms. Lee. She's recognized for her 5 minutes of questioning. Thank you. I had to get that in. I've got my tie on today.
A great day for the Gators in the Capitol today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today to help us shape a thoughtful, forward-looking approach to AI policy. Artificial intelligence is not just the technology of the future, it is already transforming the way that we live, work, and govern, and it is reshaping nearly every sector of our economy. The question before us is not whether to act, it is how to act wisely. So as policymakers, we have two responsibilities. One is to protect the public from real risks
but second, to ensure that American innovation continues to lead the world. Those goals are not mutually exclusive. In fact, the right policy framework can achieve both. So I appreciate you all being here today to help us strike that balance. I'd like to begin, Mr. Bargava, to pick up on one of the elements in your testimony about policy frameworks, and specifically this. What is your view on requiring AI developers to use standardized documentation tools like model cards to disclose purpose and limitations and training data?
Yes, absolutely. So the model card concept, I think, was originated by Google, which created the Transformer paper and has been involved in the space as well. I think those sort of rules, frameworks are actually very helpful, and it's also great that they're coming from industry. They're coming from people who are in the weeds, building the models, testing the models, and can have insights that really make sense. So the 4 general areas where I think there could be frameworks created, and I'd love to work with Congress on it, is one, looking how you gather data, so there can be ways to disclose and have the transparency that my colleague here talked about to gather data. The second is evaluating how models are trained and having folks kind of report the framework around that. The third is the outputs and testing of models. So this is both actually algorithmic testing, but also human testing. So you could have different AI models testing each other from third parties, for example. This would save costs and be an easy way to create a framework, a guideline. And in addition, I think always we'll need humans in the loop as well. And then fourth, having companies, including startups, write up what are the downstream effects of their technology, really showing their thoughtfulness. So everything I'm recommending here is things we do at General Catalyst, 200-person or so company. It's things we do at GC on all of our investments. So I do think there are frameworks that can be put in place. But it's really important, the 2 points, that one, the framework is coming from the federal government, not the state governments, and so it can be consistent and easy to understand. And two, the frameworks have to be developed with industry. I think one of the things Europe has not done enough of to date is creating these with the actual market participants, with startups, with entrepreneurs. And so we would welcome having more discussions with General Catalyst, the GC Institute, to come up with responsible frameworks, but also ones that our startups can get behind.
What should policymakers be careful not to do when designing transparency requirements, particularly for early stage or open source developers?
They should make sure to do it with the startups themselves and the companies. Really what we do not want them to do is just to create it in a vacuum, to throw in whatever words sound good or, beating up big tech, et cetera, and just making a statement. Like, this is about actually creating the right policy. So I think talking with the startups, with the market participants, with people in industry is really, really important. It's not a political statement. We all want to come to this framework, and getting the input from startups, I think, would be extremely helpful in getting to the right framework.
Getting back to that framework model card disclosure concept, is it your view that those types of disclosures should be voluntary, required for only certain high-risk applications, or broadly mandated across the industry?
I think they should be required as long as it's minimalistic. So the requirements have to make sense. You can't ask for these massive audits on a model and then when our startups comply, not get back to them for 12 months because you don't really know how to evaluate the material they sent you, for example. So I think these can be required frameworks on the federal level, but they have to make sense, and there has to be the agency there as well and the people in government to be on the other side having a conversation with what these frameworks should be. It needs to be a real partnership approach, and it needs to be simple.
Mr. Thier, let me move to you. I'd like to get your thoughts on this. Do you support directing NIST to develop voluntary AI standards or best practices similar to what it did for cybersecurity?
Yes, and the good news, Congresswoman, is that the NIST has already done a lot of that heavy lifting. And this has been a very bipartisan and widely agreed to process, a multi-stakeholder process as it's called. A lot of different players came together and formulated a really good set of standards for AI risk management, for cybersecurity, privacy. That's important work. And I think obviously Congress can build on that and talk about how to go beyond that with certain types of policies that were considered in this Congress last session and will be considered again, I'm sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. I appreciate
Gentlelady yields. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. I think you have a group of members here that are very interested in finding ways to refine and streamline our criminal justice code, and you all are very helpful with the ideas and thoughtful testimony that you have brought with you here today. I would like to go back to something, and Professor Turley, I'm going to start with you. Mr. Fox told a story about a case in his opening remarks that I thought was very instructive in this way. I am a former state court judge, and in my experience, juries work very hard to follow the instructions that are given to them, most juries, and to apply the law correctly as charged by the court. What is the effect if the elements of an offense are incoherent or vague? What is the effect on the instruction that goes to the jury, and how might that affect cases that they are deliberating upon?
Thank you for that question, because it's probably one of the most important ones that the committee can tackle. The effect is huge. You know, I spent most of my career as a criminal defense attorney, and I can say that there's certain crimes that you don't have much of an argument to make because we have strict liability criminal offenses and criminal negligence offenses. I actually testified against both 27 years ago. I think that those are two categories that the Congress should focus on, that we could do away with most of those offenses. Because once you get into court, you don't have much of an option. But so the point is that if you've got a client as a criminal defense attorney who comes on to you on one of these crimes, you know, you've got, you know, if you take a look at the Yates case that went to the Supreme Court of the undersized grouper, right? Those cases, while we look at them and go, my God, how did that ever be criminalized? It's a tough case for a criminal defense attorney because the judge is handcuffed. The judge is going to give instructions based on that statute. And as you say, jurors are very faithful in carrying it forth. And the judge tells them, you've got to apply this. So we have to eliminate those laws. We can't just rely on discretion. And the other thing about prosecutorial discretion, which is enormously important, because I really do agree with Congressman Ott when we talk about the role of prosecutors here. Most prosecutors, like Mr. Tolman, are very faithful and very thoughtful. I've worked with a lot of great ones. But prosecutorial discretion only works if you frame the range of discretion. So what you've done is you've blown away that frame. So there's literally discretion now for prosecutors covers conduct that everyone commits every day. That's the danger. It's not that we're not saying you shouldn't have discretion, but you're the ones who are supposed to wall in the discretion and allow them to work within it.
And staying on that point, I think that gets back to, I believe it was Justice Scalia, the fuzzy laws that we passed and then hand over to regulatory agencies. Share with us, if you will, what the consequence of that is when we leave too much discretion in the hands of the regulatory agencies to actually criminalize behavior, and have you seen disproportionate impact or exercise of that authority by different agencies?
Yes, I mean, there are certain agencies that pull the trigger pretty fast. But the point is that whether you're on the regulatory side or you are an actual prosecutor, there's a tendency to just lower the boom on people, to count stack, because what you want is to get a plea agreement. Most cases end up in pleas. So if you're on the defense side, you're looking at a client with limited funds, and those funds will evaporate the minute they start a criminal defense. And I mean evaporate within months. So they will have to sell their house, they'll have to tap their relatives, and the alternative is the prosecutor says, look, instead of my bringing these 100 counts against you, I'll let you plead out on 2 with no jail time. Most people accept that. And they then become part of the criminal justice system. They get a record. That stigma follows them. They have trouble getting jobs. They have trouble possibly getting leases. It's a horrific system.
And on that subject, Mr. Tolman, I know in your written testimony you mentioned the Safer Supervision Act, which actually discusses the intersection between community safety and successful reintegration.
I have the pleasure of introducing Congresswoman Laurel Lee from the great state of Florida.
Thank you. 1 year ago, our nation witnessed a horrific act of violence, the attempted assassination of President Donald J. Trump. It was an attack on our president, on the families that were gathered there to hear him speak, and on the institutions that hold our democracy together. As a member of the bipartisan task force on the assassination attempt, I joined my colleagues to ask the hard questions. How did this happen, and what can we do to make sure that it never happens again? Our final report laid out clear recommendations, and since then, Congress has acted, improving threat detection systems, strengthening agency coordination, and expanding protections for officials. The Secret Service has also responded by updating its threat modeling and improving interagency protocols. But important questions remain, and so does our responsibility. I want to thank Chairman Kelly and Chairman Pfluger for introducing the resolution. It rightly honors the bravery of those who responded. It remembers Corey Comparator, who gave his life to protect his family, and uplifts the heroism that saved others. But this resolution is more than a remembrance. It is a call to action. Threats and attacks, whether against the president, a judge, a member of Congress, or ICE agents, are unacceptable. And to those who would commit these types of acts of violence, know this: the full force of federal law enforcement will find you, will stop you, and will hold you accountable under law. Political violence has no place in America, and we must do everything in our power together to ensure that it never happens again.